Hello everyone, Alan Sens here, and welcome to the next video in our sequence on arms control. This video is on opposition to nuclear war, and obviously it's very difficult to separate out opposition to nuclear war and opposition to nuclear weapons testing and opposition to war generally. So please remember that when we talk about these things, we're often talking about movements that had many agendas, that had many concerns, and it's difficult to say that they were focused on any one issue. A lot of them shared common concerns. A lot of opposition was widespread across a broad spectrum of issues. So it's somewhat artificial to try and break them down to opposition to nuclear weapons testing as if that was somehow completely separate from opposition to nuclear war. It wasn't. But for the purposes of the videos, I think it's fair to say that there were sort of concentrations of efforts in these areas. So let's begin and have a look at opposition to nuclear war. Okay, so here are the learning objectives for this video. By the time we're done, you should be able to describe the origin and evolution of opposition to nuclear war. You should be able to provide some examples of tactics and approaches that were employed by the anti-war movement, and you should be familiar with the motives behind the anti-war movement. Well, opposition to nuclear war really grew quite dramatically after the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, but arguably by the late 1950s, actually, a broader opposition was beginning to develop against the possession of nuclear weapons, against the emergence of the nuclear arms race, and against the prospect of a nuclear war. But it was really after 1962 and the crisis of that year that the anti-nuclear war movement really started to develop. And it led to the growth of some anti-nuclear and peace organizations, which we'll look at more specifically in a future video. And it also began a period, which arguably continued right through the Cold War and into this very day, of information and protest campaigns, seeking to spread awareness about the effects of nuclear weapons and the dangers of nuclear war. It also created, very interestingly, a counterculture of information, ideas, media, and cultural events that, especially for the first part of the Cold War, was very much an insurgent movement, very much an underground kind of movement. So it's very interesting to see how the emergence of broader social movements in the United States and in Europe and other places around the world in this period had a connection or a link to the nuclear arms race and opposition to nuclear war, nuclear weapons, and things nuclear more generally. And of course, one of the aspects of this is that the idea of promoting peace was quite dominant with respect to the idea of peace through strength, that you maintain peace by having a strong defense, a strong deterrent. And it's no coincidence then that the military and more traditional ways of thinking about armed conflict and about nuclear weapons and about deterrence kind of took hold of this idea of peace and very much presented themselves, the military in particular, but also persons, politicians, and individuals who believe very much in the importance of deterrence and the need for a strong defense. They took the argument that it was they who were championing peace. And a very good example of that is right outside the headquarters of the United States Strategic Air Command was this large banner, "Peace is our profession." And the message here is we, the military, are keeping the peace with our strength, with our capabilities. And so the anti-nuclear war movement had to overcome this idea that was very powerful at the time, that peace was really only going to happen through deterrence and through strength. Well, how do you do that? Well, the tactics of the period were very widespread, very creative actually, if one looks back and reflects on this. Because again, remember what the objective is. The objective is to try to raise awareness, and the motive is to try to change people's minds about nuclear weapons, nuclear testing, the nuclear arms race, and the prospect of nuclear war. So here's one example. I like this one because it was printed in the Toronto Star in 1982. And what this particular graphic displays is it says, look, let's take a dot, and this is the dot here they're referring to. That dot represents all of the firepower, all of the explosive power of World War II. If we compare that explosive power of World War II to the megatonnage in the world's existing nuclear weapons, remember this would have been 1982, then we would have this many dots, all the dots in this graphic. And the further message was, if we take just 3 of those dots, you can see the clusters here at the top right, those 3 dots represent the weapons on one United States Poseidon SLBM submarine. In other words, just one submarine had the explosive power of 3 World War IIIs, 3 World War IIs in it. And so the whole idea is then look at this, enormous amount of destructive potential that exists in the world's arsenals today, represented by all of these red dots, each of them a World War II equivalent. Very powerful. And so this is the first step to making the argument, how many times do we need to be able to kill every man, woman, and child on Earth over again? And this graphic then tried to illustrate the madness of the nuclear arms race. Here's another one. This was a graphic that illustrated a simulated counter-value attack. So remember, that's a counter-city attack on Russian cities west of the Ural Mountains using 192 W-88 warheads. So these are the warheads that fit onto the Trident submarine-launched ballistic missiles that are on board the U.S. Trident submarines. So this is just with one submarine. And if all those warheads got through, after 48 hours, that attack would have killed 52 million Russian citizens. And so again, the argument here is that we can do this with one submarine, and yet we have these vast arsenals with so many warheads and so much megatonnage. Why are we doing this? This is crazy. So this is very much the motive behind these kinds of graphics, which were part of the anti-nuclear war movement's campaigns in this period. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists had its own method, which became quite famous, iconic even. This is the Doomsday Clock, which first appeared in 1947, and the whole idea was that the world was so many minutes to midnight being doomsday, nuclear war, and the destruction of civilization as we knew it. And based on what was happening in the world that year, the editors of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists would move the hand of the clock, either further away from midnight, indicating that things were getting better, or closer to midnight, indicating that nuclear war was imminent. Here's the history down below of the Doomsday Clock, minutes to midnight. Now the chart's a little odd because midnight is actually at the bottom there, 0000. You can see the years 1947 through to 2012, 2013. And so the closer it is to midnight, the more at risk the world is. And so you can see the Doomsday Clock was very close to midnight in these various periods. With the end of the Cold War, it came to its historic low level, and that would have been, 17 minutes to midnight. And today, or 2012, it's now sort of here at about 5 minutes to midnight. So again, a device, it's certainly not scientific, but it was used to try to raise awareness of the extent to which the world was at risk. More buttons, more slogans. This is probably the most famous one. No nukes became very much a rallying phrase for a lot of protest movements and a lot of anti-nuclear war marches. But you can see the wide variety of others. And the whole idea, again, is to have a quick, easy to remember, attractive slogan that isn't too complex, it's a simple message, but one that drives home the general point. The peace hand sign was certainly used quite extensively throughout the Cold War by the peace movement more generally, and by many peace movements, not just the anti-nuclear weapons and anti-nuclear war movement. Origins probably are in World War II. They're kind of murky. There's a big sort of historical debate about the origins of the symbol. But certainly the palm outward V sign was first used in World War II as a peace symbol. Probably actually appearing in Belgium at first, but then it caught on. Winston Churchill famously started to use it, V for Victory, and the whole V for Victory campaign. And the whole idea then was to use this symbol, easily recognizable, easily used as a symbol of peace. And it became then the peace sign in the post-war period and was used by the peace movements of the period. I just included this because I remember this postcard. So you can buy these at, drugstores and so on, and tourist outlets in Vancouver back in the 70s and 80s, or 1990s. This is the postcard called "Getting Bombed in Vancouver, Wish You Were Here," and you can mail it off to people. And of course, the design is kind of whimsical on the one hand, but then it's very serious on the other, because it's a reminder of what might happen to a place like Vancouver if it was hit by a megaton range nuclear warhead. And so this type of technique was designed to sort of bring the everyday into perspective with respect to what might happen. Popular music, all of these songs you see here were significant songs with respect to the charts, but also had very strong anti-nuclear war or anti-nuclear messages in them. You can see they span a wide period from Bob Dylan's well-known classic, "A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall," all the way to "We Don't Want No Nuclear War," which was a minor hit for Peter Tosh back in 1987. Well, if you haven't seen this movie, you should, and particularly after this course. It's a superb film. It remains so, and very much worth seeing. Of course, one of the most famous cinematic parodies of nuclear deterrence, nuclear weapons, nuclear war, and the entire nuclear weapons and military establishment at the time, characterized by particularly superb performances by Peter Sellers and other very well-known actors, George C. Scott as well. Another movie, perhaps less successful in terms of its box office success, but certainly more serious and more impactful, was If You Love This Planet, which was a documentary film produced by the National Film Board of Canada. It's essentially a film of a speech by Dr. Helen Caldicott at the State University of New York in 1982. It's a very well-known piece, not least because it was designated as foreign political propaganda by the United States Department of Justice, and of course that instantly made it extremely popular. And in 1982, in fact, it won the Academy Award for documentary short subject. Dr. Helen Caldicott herself was a well-known anti-nuclear war and anti-nuclear weapons activist during the Cold War. The day after was another well-known moment in sort of the public eye with respect to anti-nuclear war sentiment. It's a 1983 made-for-television movie. It's a little dated now. I didn't think it was wonderful. I preferred the British television movie Threads. But nevertheless, it is the highest rated TV movie in history. It was watched by 100 million viewers. It was a major TV event in the United States. There were shows afterward to discuss it and what did it mean. And you have to remember that for a lot of American citizens, this might have been their first exposure to what a nuclear war might be like, even though it was a TV film and you know, very much pulled punches with respect to you know, the severity of what might happen. but it was a major development in terms of the broader discussion about nuclear war in society at the time. Finally, there was a growing literature on sort of the language of nuclear weapons and the sort of sterile language of deterrence, discussions about yield, for example, as a substitute for explosions, collateral damage, casualties as opposed to deaths and injuries, and the sheer horror of nuclear war seemed to be submerged in this complex language, this technical language, which swept a lot of the reality of what was being discussed under the rug. This piece I really like. It's one of my favorites in this genre. It was by Carol Cohn. It was called Slickums, Glickums, Christmas Trees, and Cookie Cutters, a Nuclear Language and How We Learn to Pat the Bomb. It's on the reading list for the course. I really strongly encourage having a look at it. You don't have to, read it for great depth, but just absorb what Carol Cohn is trying to say. It's very illuminating, I think, and gives pause to a lot of the technical language that we've used in the course and that others use to talk about nuclear weapons. Okay, so that was sort of a tour through some of the tactics and approaches employed by the anti-war movement. You should be able to discuss those now and provide examples, as well as talk a little bit about how some of these movements got started, and you should be familiar with the broad motives behind the anti-war movement. Okay. So obviously we could have gone on forever, right? I mean, it's an enormous subject. The anti-nuclear war, anti-nuclear testing, anti-war in general movement and movements could be a subject in and of themselves. This video is really about approaches, about tactics, about the techniques that they tried to use to heighten awareness and to raise public opposition to nuclear war in particular. In the next video, we're going to move on to a look at the peace movements more specifically. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again soon.